The email glows on my laptop screen. The words mortgage payment confirmation, a harsh blue in the 3 a.m. darkness of my tiny apartment. $180,000. Gone, transferred, done. My parents' house, the house I grew up in, the house that was weeks away from foreclosure, is now theirs, free and clear. A laugh, a bitter little sound escapes me. It's nothing like my brother Jake's laugh, the one that boomed across the dinner table 6 months ago. That laugh, full of smug certainty, echoed by my sister Emma's pitying smile and my parents' uncomfortable silence. That laugh had been the soundtrack to the death of my latest silly idea. A meditation app, Maya, Jake had said, wiping a tear of mirth from his eye. Seriously, who's going to pay for another one of those, and made by you? The memory still stings, a fresh wound even now. My family, they love me, I think, in their own way. But their love is wrapped in layers of disappointment, of expectations I've never met. I'm Maya, the dreamer, the one who flits from one grand idea to the next, never seeing anything through, or so they think. The smell of stale coffee, cold and accusing in its mug beside me, is the perfume of the last 6 months. That and the constant low hum of my overworked laptop. The blue light from the screen paints my face, probably making the dark circles under my eyes look even more cavernous. I haven't slept properly in weeks, but this is a different kind of exhaustion. It's the bone-deep weariness of a battle fought and won in secret. Triumph. That's there, a hot, fierce pulse under the hurt. I did it. My ridiculous app, Mindful Moments, the one they mocked, the one they were so sure would be another of Maya's failures. It just paid off their mortgage, and they have no idea. It was a bit of a power move, I admit, even before tonight. A few weeks ago, when the first serious money started rolling in, a crazy idea sparked. I'd overheard Mom on the phone, her voice tight with a stress she was trying to hide. Just a temporary cash flow issue, she'd said, a little too brightly. But I knew. I'd seen the letters from the bank, carelessly left on the kitchen counter. So I did some digging. A few discreet calls, a bit of online sleuthing disguised as market research for my app. It wasn't hard to find the exact outstanding balance on their mortgage. $180,347.22. I'd memorized the number. Now the confirmation email sits there, a testament. I minimize it, the glow dimming slightly. My banking app is still open from the transfer. The balance in my business account, even after that massive withdrawal, is still impressive. More money than I've ever seen in my life. More money than my lawyer brother or my perfectly married with a sensible job sister probably have, for all their condescending advice. My hand trembles as I hover the cursor over the log out button. It's done. The biggest secret I've ever kept. The biggest I told you so, I'll never actually say. Or will I? Part of me, the part that's still that humiliated girl at the dinner table, wants to print out the confirmation and frame it, hang it in their living room. But the other part, the part that's grown in the silence and the struggle of the last 6 months, just feels a quiet sense of completion. What now? They'll get a letter from the bank, I suppose. A very confusing, very official letter. Questions will be asked. Theories will be spun. And I'll be right there, playing surprised, playing dumb. Maya, the dreamer, who couldn't possibly be responsible for such a monumental adult act. The first hint of gray is starting to lighten the sky outside my window. A new day. For them, a day free of a crushing weight they didn't even know was about to be lifted in such an extraordinary way. For me, it's just another day of running the business that saved them. The business they scorned. The irony isn't lost on me. It's a bitter pill, but tonight it tastes a little like victory. My finger clicks. Logged out. The screen goes dark, plunging me back into the pre-dawn gloom, alone with my secret, the silence, and the lingering scent of cold coffee. 6 months ago, it feels like a lifetime, but the memory is seared into me, sharp and brutal. Sunday dinner. The scene of so many of my quiet humiliations. But this one was a masterpiece. I can still see them all around the polished mahogany table, the one Mom, Linda, obsessed over. She's always been about appearances, my mother. Her perfectly coiffed hair, her subtly expensive clothes, her insistence on a formal family dinner every Sunday, even though Jake and Emma clearly found it a chore. Tonight she was beaming, basking in the reflected glory of her successful children. Dad, Robert, was at the head of the table, as usual. Quiet, often lost in his own world, but quick to agree with Mom, especially when it came to my shortcomings. He's a good man, I think, but easily swayed, and my perpetual lack of aerial job has always been a source of unspoken disappointment for him. Then there was Jake, my older brother. Successful lawyer, condescending smirk permanently affixed. He'd just won some big case, and the air was thick with his self-congratulation. He leaned back in his chair, glass of expensive red wine in hand, looking every bit the legal eagle. And Emma, my younger sister, the golden child, married to a doctor, 2 perfect kids, a tastefully decorated suburban home. She had that serene, slightly pitying smile she always reserved for me, the one that said, "Oh, Maya, still tilting at windmills?" The clatter of forks on plates was the background music to their conversation. Jake's courtroom triumphs, Emma's latest PTA fundraiser, Mom's plans for redecorating the guest bathroom. I waited, picking at my roast chicken, my stomach churning with a mixture of nerves and excitement. I'd been working on the concept for mindful moments for weeks, pouring all my spare hours into market research, sketching out interfaces, dreaming of features. This was it, I thought. This was the one. "So," I began, my voice a little too high, a little too eager, "I have an idea I wanted to share with you all." A brief silence. 4 pairs of eyes turned to me. Jake raised an eyebrow, a hint of amusement already playing on his lips. "It's an app," I continued, trying to project a confidence I didn't feel. "A meditation and mindfulness app. I'm calling it Mindful Moments. It's designed to be really user-friendly with short, guided meditations for specific situations, like anxiety before a presentation, or stress during a commute, or just helping you fall asleep." I rushed on, explaining the unique features I'd envisioned, the personalized programs, the community aspect. I talked about the growing mental wellness market, the potential for helping people. My voice was earnest, passionate. I laid my heart out on that mahogany table. The response began as a snicker. From Jake, of course. Then Emma giggled, a delicate tinkling sound that somehow felt more cutting than Jake's outright mockery. Dad shuffled uncomfortably, looking at Mom. Mom just sighed, a slow, deliberate exhalation that spoke volumes. "A meditation app, Maya," Jake finally managed, his voice thick with laughter. He put down his wine glass, needing both hands to gesture his incredulity. "Another one? The App Store is flooded with them. What makes you think yours will be any different? And no offense, but since when are you an expert in meditation? Or apps?" "I've been doing a lot of research," I said, my cheeks burning. "And I'm learning to code. I think I have a unique angle." "A unique angle?" Emma chimed in, her perfect brow furrowed in mock seriousness. "Is the unique angle that it's made by our Maya, who, last we checked, was between, what was it this time, dog walking and freelance graphic design?" The laughter became general then. Not cruel, not exactly. More dismissive. Like I was a slightly eccentric child telling them I was going to build a rocket to the moon. The clatter of forks resumed, a deafening punctuation mark to their amusement as they turned back to their real conversations, leaving my idea hanging in the air, dead. "Well, dear," Mom said finally, patting my hand with a pitying look, "it's nice that you have hobbies, but perhaps focus on finding a stable job? Your father and I worry." "It's not a hobby, Mom," I whispered, but my voice was lost. The humiliation was a physical thing, a tightening in my chest, a bitter taste in my mouth. I felt small, insignificant. The family failure confirmed once again. My siblings, paragons of conventional success. Jake, the high-flying lawyer. Emma, the domestic goddess with the perfect life. And me, Maya, the 20-something dreamer with a string of half-finished projects and a new silly idea every few months. That was their narrative, and they clung to it. I don't remember much about the rest of the dinner. I mumbled some excuse and retreated to my old childhood bedroom. The floral wallpaper and dusty collection of forgotten teddy bears, a testament to a past I couldn't seem to escape. The laughter followed me, echoing in my head. But as I sat there, surrounded by the ghosts of my younger, more naive self, something shifted. The humiliation didn't dissipate, but it solidified. It turned into a cold, hard knot of anger, of determination. They thought it was silly. They thought I couldn't do it. Fine. That night, I didn't sleep. At 2 a.m., the house silent around me, I opened my laptop. The glow of the screen was a small beacon in the darkness. I typed how to build an app into the search bar. My fingers flew across the keyboard, fueled by their laughter, by years of being underestimated. If they wouldn't believe in me, I would believe in myself. I would build mindful moments, and I would prove every single one of them wrong. The rage was a surprisingly potent fuel, burning away the hurt, leaving only a stark, unwavering resolve. The first line of code, clumsy and uncertain, appeared on the screen. It wasn't much, but it was a start. My start. The next 6 months were a blur, a relentless grind fueled by caffeine, spite, and a burgeoning defiant hope. Their laughter became the soundtrack to my hustle. Every dismissive comment, every pitying glance replayed in my mind, pushing me forward. I became a creature of the night. My days were a patchwork of soul-crushing, bill-paying jobs. Barista from 6 a.m. to 2 p.m., the smell of burnt coffee clinging to me like cheap perfume. Then a quick change in a gas station bathroom into something vaguely presentable for my rideshare gig. Navigating city traffic until my eyes burned, ferrying strangers from one point to another, their chatter a meaningless drone. The pay was barely enough to cover rent on my tiny studio apartment and my ever-present student loans. Food became an afterthought. Ramen noodles, day-old bagels from the coffee shop, whatever was cheap and quick. But when the city finally quieted, when my official workdays were done, my real work began. My tiny apartment transformed into a command center. My laptop, an aging machine that wheezed in protest, became my most prized possession. I devoured online coding courses, Python, Swift, JavaScript. I watched hours of YouTube tutorials, my brain aching with new information. The jargon, initially impenetrable, slowly started to make sense. Debugging became a familiar frustration, then a small triumph. The burn in my eyes from staring at the screen for hours on end became a constant companion. The taste of endless energy drinks, sickly sweet and metallic, was the flavor of my ambition. Slowly, miraculously, mindful moments began to take shape, from crude wireframes sketched on napkins during my coffee breaks to a clunky but functional prototype. I found a small online community of indie developers, strangers who offered advice and encouragement without the baggage of familial expectation. Their anonymous support was a lifeline. Family interactions during this time were strained. Sunday dinners continued, a weekly ritual of subtle interrogation. "So, Maya, what are you actually doing these days?" Jake would ask, his tone implying I was doing nothing of consequence. "Still freelancing," I'd say vaguely, offering a tight smile. "Keeping busy." "That's good, dear," Mom would chirp, though her eyes said, "When are you going to get a real career?" Emma would offer well-meaning but utterly useless advice about networking or temp agencies. I learned to deflect, to keep my answers short, to reveal nothing. Their continued dismissal, their utter lack of curiosity about what I was really doing, only hardened my resolve. This was my secret, my project, my rebellion. There were small victories that kept me going. The day the first guided meditation actually played through the prototype without crashing. The first time a beta tester, a stranger from an online forum, sent feedback saying a 3-minute breathing exercise had genuinely calmed their anxiety before a job interview. That email, I printed it out and stuck it to my wall, a tiny beacon of validation in my caffeine-fueled cave. My exhaustion was immense, a physical weight pressing down on me, but with each small success, a flicker of confidence grew. I wasn't just a dreamer anymore. I was a builder, a creator, an entrepreneur. Though the word felt too grand for someone living on instant noodles. One particularly bleak Tuesday, after a coding session that had stretched until 4 a.m., fueled by the dregs of an energy drink and sheer stubbornness, I made a decision. This wasn't just a project anymore. This was a business. Before heading to the coffee shop, smelling of stale air and sleep deprivation, I logged onto the state's business portal. I filled out the forms, paid the fee with a credit card that was perilously close to its limit. Mindful Moments, LLC was officially born. I didn't tell a soul, it was my secret armor. Weeks later, the app was ready, or as ready as it would ever be. Polished, tested, submitted to the app stores. Then came the waiting, an agonizing period of silence where my anxiety gnawed at me. What if they rejected it? What if, after all this, it was for nothing? The approval notification arrived on a Sunday. Of course, it had to be a Sunday. I was at my parents' house and during another family dinner. Jake was recounting a tedious golf game. Emma was showing off pictures of her kids' latest achievements. My phone buzzed in my lap. I glanced down, expecting another ride request or a spam email. Congratulations! Your app, Mindful Moments, has been approved and is now live on the App Store. My breath caught. A wave of dizziness washed over me. It was real. It was out there. I wanted to scream, to laugh, to shove the phone in their faces. Instead, I slipped it back into my pocket, my heart hammering against my ribs. I looked up, meeting their oblivious gazes. "Everything all right, Maya?" Mom asked, noticing my flushed cheeks. "Fine, Mom," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "Just fine." The biggest moment of my life so far, and they hadn't a clue. And that, I realized, was exactly how I wanted it. For now. Mindful Moments went live on a Tuesday, with all the fanfare of a silent film. No launch party, no congratulatory emails flooding my inbox, no buzz on social media, just a quiet little icon appearing in the vast, overwhelming ocean of the app stores. The first week was brutal. 12 downloads. I knew every single one of them by heart. My own phone, my old tablet, a couple of sympathetic developer friends from the online forum, and probably a few pity downloads from people who'd stumbled across my desperate, slightly pathetic posts on obscure subreddits. 12. After 6 months of relentless work, of sacrificing sleep, social life, and sanity, it was a punch to the gut. My family naturally remained blissfully ignorant. They didn't even know the app existed. Why would they? I was just Maya, still figuring things out, still in her perpetual phase. The irony was a constant, bitter companion, but that anger, that spark of defiance that had ignited this whole journey, hadn't died. It just banked, smoldering. I refused to let Mindful Moments fade into oblivion. So began the grinding phase. I became a one-woman marketing machine, operating on a shoestring budget of approximately $0. I learned about SEO for app stores, A/B tested listing descriptions until my eyes crossed and spammed, politely I hoped, every marginally relevant blog, forum, and social media group I could find. I emailed tech writers, wellness influencers, mental health advocates. Most emails went unanswered. The few replies I got were usually polite rejections. The sound of my phone's notification ping became my obsession. Each one was a tiny jolt of hope, quickly followed by the familiar sting of disappointment when it turned out to be another bill reminder or a promotional email for a new brand of energy drink. Then, about 3 weeks in, a different kind of notification, a review. My first genuine, unsolicited review. My hands trembled as I opened it. 5 stars, it read. I've struggled with anxiety for years, and nothing has really helped. I stumbled across Mindful Moments and tried the pre-meeting calm meditation. It was only 5 minutes, but it made a huge difference. I actually felt prepared and confident. Thank you, whoever made this. Tears welled in my eyes. Real, actual tears. I wasn't just tilting at windmills. I wasn't just trying to prove my family wrong. I was actually helping someone. That one review from a stranger named Sarah_78 became my fuel. It was more potent than any energy drink. Suddenly, the work didn't feel quite so thankless. I started engaging with the few users I had, responding to their feedback, asking what they wanted to see. Someone suggested a feature for tracking mood. Another asked for longer sleep meditations. I listened, I pivoted, I coded, I updated. Slowly, painstakingly, the numbers began to creep up. From dozens of downloads to a few hundred. The notification pings became a little more frequent, a little less likely to be a bill collector. A few more positive reviews trickled in. Each one felt like a personal victory. Every penny the app made, and in those early days, it was truly pennies. From the optional buy me a coffee in-app purchase I'd hesitantly included, I reinvested. A small amount for slightly better App Store advertising. A few dollars to boost a social media post. I was still living on ramen, still driving strangers around the city until the early hours of the morning, but now there was a tiny, growing seed of hope. Mindful Moments wasn't just an idea anymore. It was a living, breathing thing, and it was starting to find its people. One evening, exhausted after a 12-hour rideshare shift, I was scrolling through Instagram, more out of habit than anything else. My feed was the usual curated perfection influencers in exotic locations, perfectly plated meals, aspirational lifestyles. Then I saw it. A story from Anya Sharma, a major wellness influencer with over 2 million followers. She was talking about her struggle with burnout, her search for genuine mindfulness tools. And then she held up her phone. On the screen, clear as day, was the Mindful Moments logo. And I found this little gem, Anya was saying, her voice warm and authentic. It's called Mindful Moments. Super simple, no fluff, just really effective short meditations. Honestly, it's been a game changer for my anxiety this week. You guys should check it out. My phone clattered to the floor. My hands were shaking too hard to hold it. Anya Sharma recommending my app to 2 million people. I stared at my reflection in the dark screen of my fallen phone, my eyes wide with disbelief. This couldn't be happening, could it? The world tilted. 1 minute, I was Maya Chen, ramen-fueled coder and part-time chauffeur, celebrating a handful of daily downloads. The next, I didn't even know what I was. Anya Sharma's Instagram story was like a detonation. My phone, which had been mostly silent save for the occasional ride request or bill reminder, began to buzz. Then it began to vibrate. Then it seemed to achieve a state of perpetual motion, a frantic, insistent tremor in my hand. Notifications, App Store sales, new user signups, comments, emails, hundreds, then thousands. Overnight, the numbers were staggering, unreal. Downloads jumped from a couple of hundred a day to 10,000 in the first 12 hours after Anya's post. Then 20,000. Then 50. The in-app purchases for premium content, the Unlock All Meditations feature I'd priced at a modest $4.99, started rolling in at a rate that made my head spin. My little Buy Me a Coffee button was suddenly generating enough for a lifetime supply of artisanal lattes. My ancient laptop, bless its wheezing circuits, could barely keep up with the analytics dashboard. The graph, once a flat line bumping along the bottom, was now a near vertical ascent. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. It was completely and utterly overwhelming. Tech blogs, the ones that hadn't even bothered to send a rejection email to my pitiful pitches, suddenly started sniffing around. Mindful Moments, the indie meditation app taking the wellness world by storm. Overnight success, how a solo developer captured the zeitgeist. Solo developer, that was me. It sounded so much more impressive than exhausted girl living on stale bagels. And my family? Still blissfully, infuriatingly oblivious. Sunday dinner came and went. Jake was complaining about his golf handicap. Emma was planning a lavish birthday party for one of her perfect children. Mom was fretting about the right shade of beige for the hallway. "You look a bit tired, Maya dear," Mom had said, peering at me with concern. "Are you getting enough sleep? Maybe you should cut back on whatever it is you do on that computer all night." If only she knew. The irony was so thick, I could barely swallow my overcooked broccoli. I was making more money in a day than she and Dad probably earned in a month, and they were worried I wasn't getting a real job. The constant buzzing of my phone became the new soundtrack to my life. It was a Pavlovian response. Every vibration was a hit of dopamine, a confirmation that this crazy dream was actually happening. But it was also a source of immense stress. The success felt surreal, fragile, like it could all vanish as quickly as it had appeared. With the explosion in users came a whole new set of problems. The cheap server I was using for the backend couldn't handle the traffic. The app started crashing. Users, once delighted, were now frustrated. The 5-star reviews were being joined by 1-star complaints. I was in way over my head. I stopped sleeping almost entirely. 16-hour days became the norm, then 18. I was coding, answering customer support emails, which were now flooding in, trying to figure out how to scale a server, what even was a server farm, and fielding calls from journalists, all while still trying to maintain the facade of Maya, the directionless dreamer, for my family. The personal cost was immense. I was isolated, running on fumes, a frayed nerve ending masquerading as a human being. My diet consisted of coffee, energy drinks, and the occasional handful of dry cereal eaten standing over the sink. This couldn't continue. One morning, after a particularly brutal night of server crashes and angry user emails, I looked at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. The dark circles under my eyes were practically bruises. I was a mess. But I was also, I realized, the CEO of a rapidly growing, incredibly successful company. It was time to act like one. I found a consultant, someone who specialized in scaling tech startups. I hired a freelance customer support team. I upgraded the servers, a terrifyingly expensive undertaking. I finally officially incorporated Mindful Moments, Inc., with myself as the sole shareholder. I even hired a part-time assistant to help manage the chaos. Each step was a power move, born of necessity but also of a dawning understanding of my own capabilities. I was no longer just a coder, I was a businesswoman. One evening, I was at my parents' house, ostensibly to fix their printer, my unofficial role as family tech support. I was bone-tired, my mind still buzzing with a dozen urgent tasks for the app. I heard voices from the kitchen, hushed, anxious. Mom and Dad. "I just don't know what we're going to do, Robert," Mom was saying, her voice cracking. "The bank called again. If we don't make a payment by the end of the month, they said foreclosure. Foreclosure. The word hit me like a physical blow. My parents, the ones who worried about my stability, were about to lose their home. And in the midst of my own whirlwind success, my own secret triumph, I hadn't had a clue. The buzzing in my pocket, the constant stream of notifications from my thriving app, suddenly felt very, very different. The word hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Foreclosure. My parents, losing their house. The house I grew up in, the repository of countless childhood memories, both good and bad. The house where they'd laughed at my dreams. I stood frozen in the hallway, the broken printer clutched in my hand, forgotten. I wasn't meant to hear this. This was a private conversation, a secret sorrow they were clearly trying to hide, especially from their successful children, Jake and Emma. Family pride, a stubborn, often misguided force, was at play here. They wouldn't want their lawyer son or their perfectly settled daughter to know they were struggling. And certainly not me, Maya, the family's designated financial black hole. My first instinct was a rush of cold, vindictive satisfaction. "Serves them right," a nasty little voice whispered in my head. Let them see what real struggle felt like. Let them taste the fear I'd lived with for years, the constant anxiety of juggling bills and scraping by. But then another sound, a soft, choked sob. My mother. Behind the closed kitchen door, my strong, composed, always in control mother was crying. The sound cut through my anger, my hurt, like a knife. This wasn't some abstract financial problem. This was her home, her security, her life, crumbling around her. And Dad, his voice usually so blustery or distant, was murmuring soft, helpless reassurances. The internal conflict was instantaneous, a war raging in my chest. The desire for revenge, for that ultimate "I told you so," slammed up against a lifetime of complicated love for these people, my family. They had hurt me, yes. They had dismissed me, underestimated me, made me feel small. But they were also my parents. The people who had, in their own flawed way, raised me. Anger, hurt, and a fierce, unexpected surge of protective instinct collided within me. It was a dizzying, disorienting mix. I could let them fail. I could stand by and watch their carefully constructed world collapse, a silent, smug observer, or I could do something. The broken printer suddenly felt very heavy. I crept away from the kitchen door, my heart pounding. Back in the living room, I sank onto the sofa, my mind racing. How bad was it? Foreclosure wasn't something that happened overnight. They must have been struggling for months, hiding it. The weight of their secret, their shame, must have been immense. My app, Mindful Moments. The irony was almost unbearable. An app designed to alleviate stress and anxiety, and its creator was now tangled in a web of family financial trauma. My journalistic instincts, honed by months of researching app markets and user demographics, kicked in. I needed information. Later that week, under the guise of needing old financial documents for a fictional grant application I was thinking about, I managed to get a look at some of their recent bank statements. It was worse than I thought. Missed payments stretching back 3 months. Ominous letters filled with legal jargon. The numbers were stark, brutal. I went back to my apartment, the information a cold knot in my stomach. I opened my Mindful Moments dashboard. The revenue figures glowed on the screen: daily earnings, weekly totals, monthly projections. It was still surreal, but the numbers were undeniable. I did a quick calculation, my fingers flying over the keyboard. The amount they owed the bank, the sum that stood between them and losing their home. My app had generated more than that in the last month alone. The power I held was terrifying. I could save them. I could wipe away their biggest fear with a few clicks of a mouse, and they would never have to know it was me. The idea began to form, tentative at first, then gaining a thrilling, audacious momentum. An anonymous benefactor, a mysterious gift. They'd never suspect their failure daughter. The family stress, palpable even through their attempts to hide it, was ramping up. Mom was more on edge than usual, Dad more withdrawn. Jake and Emma, I suspected, were still in the dark. The tension was a ticking clock. Then, another intercepted piece of mail, carelessly left on the hall table during one of my visits. A stark white envelope, official, menacing. I recognized the bank's logo. My heart hammered as I slid it open, my hands shaking. It was the formal foreclosure notice. They had 30 days. 30 days until their lives were irrevocably altered. 30 days. And I held the solution in the palm of my hand, or rather, in the burgeoning bank account of the app they'd mocked. The game, it seemed, had just become a whole lot more interesting, and a whole lot more complicated. 30 days. The deadline loomed, a guillotine blade hanging over my family's unsuspecting heads. The stress in their house was a physical entity, coiling in the corners, making the air thick and hard to breathe. Mom jumped at every phone call. Dad stared blankly at the television, his face a mask of quiet despair. They were trying so hard to maintain a brave face, but the cracks were showing. My internal battle raged. The petty, vengeful part of me still whispered, "Let them sweat. Let them understand what desperation feels like." But the image of my mother's tears, the sound of her choked sobs, kept replaying in my mind. And underneath all the hurt, all the years of feeling like a disappointment, there was still love. A complicated, messy, but undeniable love. The decision, when it came, wasn't a lightning bolt. It was a slow dawning, like the gray light of the early mornings I'd grown so accustomed to. I would do it. I would pay off the mortgage. Anonymously. The thought sent a shiver of something powerful, something akin to exhilaration through me. This wasn't just about saving them, it was about control. It was about rewriting the narrative, even if only I knew the truth. The technical execution was complex. I couldn't just transfer $180,000 from my Mindful Moments Inc. business account directly to their mortgage lender. That would leave a trail a mile wide. Jake, with his lawyer brain, would sniff that out in a heartbeat. No, this had to be untraceable, truly anonymous. I spent days researching, my coding skills proving useful in unexpected ways. Offshore accounts, third-party payment processors, shell corporations. It was a rabbit hole of financial subterfuge. Finally, I found a reputable, if discreet, law firm that specialized in anonymous philanthropic donations. It would cost a hefty fee, but It would be worth it for the peace of mind, for the perfect execution of my plan. The emotional preparation was harder. I had to mentally steel myself, to bury the part of me that craved acknowledgement, that yearned to see the shock and, yes, the shame on their faces when they realized who their savior was. This had to be pure, a gift, a secret, my secret. The day I made the transfer, my heart felt like it was trying to beat its way out of my chest. I sat in my tiny apartment, the blinds drawn, the only light coming from my laptop screen. The lawyer had set up the intermediary account. The funds were cleared from Mindful Moments Inc. to the law firm. Now the final step, transferring $180,347.22 to their mortgage company. The exact amount. My finger hovered over the confirm transfer button. This was it. No going back. I clicked. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a small, unassuming confirmation message popped up. Your payment has been processed. It was done. I leaned back in my chair, my body trembling. A wave of emotion washed over me. Relief, triumph, a strange sort of sadness, and an almost giddy sense of power. The lawyer handled the rest just as we'd planned. A carefully worded letter was drafted, sent on the firm's letterhead to my parents, explaining that a client of theirs, a philanthropist who wished to remain strictly anonymous, had been moved by stories of families facing hardship and had chosen, at random, to clear their outstanding mortgage. It was vague, slightly unbelievable, but official sounding enough to hopefully quell too many questions. The aftermath was fascinating to watch. I was there at Sunday dinner, of course, when the letter from the law firm arrived. Dad opened it, his brow furrowed in confusion. He read it once, then twice, his face paling. He handed it to Mom, his hand shaking. She read it, her eyes widening. A small gasp escaped her lips, then tears. But this time, they weren't tears of despair. They were tears of disbelief, of overwhelming, unadulterated relief. Robert, I don't understand, she stammered, looking at him, then at Jake and Emma, then at me. It says the mortgage. It's paid, in full. Chaos erupted. Confusion, joy, disbelief. Jake snatched the letter, his lawyerly eyes scanning it critically. Emma started crying along with Mom. Dad just sat there, stunned into silence. An anonymous benefactor? Jake scoffed, though there was a tremor in his voice. Who does that? This has to be some kind of mistake, or a scam. But the law firm was legitimate, easily verifiable, and the subsequent call to the bank confirmed it. The mortgage was gone, vanished. I watched them, my face a carefully constructed mask of surprise and confusion, mirroring their own. Wow, that's incredible. I managed, my voice suitably awed. Who on earth would do something like that? Inside, I was bursting. The secret knowledge was a warm, glowing ember in my chest. I had done this. I, Maya, the family failure, had saved them. The satisfaction was immense, intoxicating. They spent weeks speculating. A long-lost relative? A lottery winner with a guilty conscience? A secret admirer of Mom's rose garden? The theories grew more outlandish by the day. They celebrated, of course. A quiet, tearful dinner full of gratitude for their mysterious savior. I toasted along with them, my expression perfectly innocent. My poker face was flawless. But then, a new wrinkle. Jake, ever the skeptic, ever the investigator, wasn't satisfied. This doesn't add up, he kept saying, pacing their living room. People don't just give away nearly $200,000 anonymously. There's something more to this, and I'm going to find out what. He looked directly at me, a speculative gleam in his eye. Maya, you're good with computers, right? Any ideas how someone could do this untraceably? My heart skipped a beat. The game, it seemed, was far from over. Jake's suspicion was like a relentless terrier latched onto a bone. His lawyer instincts, usually reserved for uncooperative witnesses or dubious contracts, were now fully engaged in unraveling the mystery of the benevolent benefactor. It was unnerving. I had built layers of obfuscation, paid hefty fees for anonymity, but Jake had a way of dissecting things, of finding the loose thread. There has to be a paper trail. He'd mutter at Sunday dinners, his eyes narrowed in thought. Even anonymous donations go through channels. Banks, lawyers. Someone knows something. My palms would grow sweaty under the table. I'd meticulously covered my tracks, or so I thought. The law firm was too olid, their reputation for discretion impeccable. But the nagging fear remained. What if I'd missed something? What if the sheer size of the payment, originating from a new tech company, raised a flag somewhere? The family theories continued to fly, each more improbable than the last. Aunt Mildred's rumored secret lottery win, a grateful former client of Dad's from his short-lived handyman business. Even, Emma suggested with a giggle, a billionaire eccentric who picked names out of a hat. I contributed to the speculation with carefully crafted, bland suggestions, all designed to lead to nowhere. There were a few heart-stopping moments. Jake, in his amateur sleuthing, started looking into large, recent philanthropic gifts in the state. "There's this new foundation that popped up," he announced one evening, scrolling through something on his phone. "The Chen Legacy Fund? No, wait, that's not it, but something similar, focusing on hardship relief." My blood ran cold. I'd briefly considered, then discarded. A name like that for a charitable arm of Mindful Moments I was vaguely planning for the future. Had I mentioned it to someone? Left a note somewhere? I feigned disinterest, my heart hammering. "Probably just a coincidence, Jake. Lots of people do charity work." He'd also started looking into companies that had recently had a windfall. "Tech startups," he mused. "Sometimes they hit it big, and the founders get all idealistic." He was getting dangerously close to home. My deflection tactics became an art form. I'd casually mention some obscure tax loophole for anonymous donations I'd read about somewhere, sending him down a completely irrelevant rabbit hole. Or I'd remember a conversation where Mom mentioned a distant cousin who'd struck it rich in cryptocurrency, a fabrication that kept him occupied for a week. Meanwhile, Mindful Moments continued its meteoric rise. We hit 100,000 downloads, then 200,000. The revenue was steady, impressive. I started doing podcast interviews, carefully curated appearances on tech and wellness shows. I was always Maya C., founder of Mindful Moments, keeping my last name and personal details vague, citing privacy concerns in the wellness space. My family, of course, didn't listen to obscure tech podcasts. They still thought I was just playing on my computer. The stress of the double life was immense. One minute I was discussing server capacity and marketing funnels with my growing team, all remote, thankfully. The next, I was at a family barbecue, trying to sound suitably impressed by Jake's latest legal victory or Emma's organic vegetable garden. My phone was a constant source of anxiety. What if a notification popped up with a Mindful Moments sales report while Jake was looking over my shoulder? I learned to keep it face down, on silent, whenever I was around them. One afternoon, Emma called me, her voice full of excitement. "Maya, you have to try this app. It's called Mindful Moments. It's amazing." I've been so stressed with the kids lately, and their 5-minute meditations are literally saving my sanity. Everyone at my yoga class is talking about it. I almost dropped the phone. Emma, my perfect dismissive sister, using my app, loving my app, and having no idea I was the one behind it. "Oh, really?" I managed, my voice a little shaky. "Mindful Moments, huh? I'll check it out." The irony was almost too much to bear. That evening, Jake was over at my tiny apartment, ostensibly to help me fix a leaky faucet. His version of brotherly concern, usually accompanied by a lecture on my life choices. He was still muttering about the benefactor. "I've been thinking," he said, tapping a wrench against his palm. "What if it's someone local? Someone who knows Mom and Dad, knows they were struggling." This was my chance. A power move born of desperation and a flash of insight. "You know," I said casually, as if the thought had just occurred to me. "Dad mentioned something a while ago about an old army buddy of his, someone who moved to California and made a fortune in real estate. He said the guy always talked about giving back to his old friends if he ever struck it rich. What was his name? Henderson? Anderson?" Jake seized on it. "Anderson, yes. I remember Dad talking about him. That's a lead, a real lead." He practically ran out of my apartment, faucet forgotten, already dialing Dad's number. I leaned against the door, my legs weak with relief. Another misdirection successfully deployed. He'd be chasing that ghost for weeks. But the reprieve was short-lived. A few days later, an email landed in my Mindful Moments inbox. Not from a user, not from a supplier. From Sarah Jenkins, features editor at the local Chronicle, our hometown newspaper. Dear Miss C, it read, we've been following the remarkable success of your app, Mindful Moments, with great interest. We understand you're a local entrepreneur, and we'd love to feature you in an upcoming piece on homegrown tech success stories. Would you be available for an interview and photo shoot next week? Local, homegrown, photo shoot. My carefully constructed anonymity was about to be blown sky high. And this time, I wasn't sure there was a deflection tactic clever enough to save me. The email from the local Chronicle sat in my inbox like a ticking time bomb. Local tech entrepreneur Maya Chen. They'd used my full name. How had they connected Maya C. of podcast fame to Maya Chen, daughter of Robert and Linda Chen of Elm Street? A lucky guess? A deeper dive into business registration records? It didn't matter. The threat was real. My first instinct was to ignore it. Delete the email, pretend it never happened. But they'd find someone else to write about, and the seed of local tech success was already planted. What if they dug further on their own and stumbled upon the Mindful Moments LLC registration, then started asking my parents questions? The thought of them finding out this way through a newspaper reporter was horrifying. I had to control the narrative, or at least try to. I agreed to the interview, but with strict conditions. No photo shoot. Focus on the app, not my personal life. Vague answers about my background. The journalist, a young, eager woman named Chloe, seemed amenable. The article came out the following Sunday, a full-page spread in the lifestyle section. Mindful mogul, hometown woman's app conquers stress. There was a generic stock photo of someone meditating on a beach. And then the text. Maya Chen, a quiet but driven entrepreneur from our own city, is the brains behind Mindful Moments, the meditation app that's rapidly gaining national attention. I bought a copy, my hands trembling as I read it at my kitchen table. It wasn't too bad. Chloe had mostly respected my wishes, focusing on the app's features and its positive impact on users. But my name was there, Maya Chen, plain as day. That afternoon, my phone rang. It was Mom. Her voice was strange, a mixture of shock and something else I couldn't quite identify. Maya, your father and we just saw the Chronicle. My stomach plummeted. Oh? I tried to sound casual. This app, Mindful Moments, it's yours? Really yours? Yes, Mom, I said quietly. It's mine. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for an eternity. Then, but why didn't you tell us? All this time, we thought you were, well, struggling. The confrontation I'd been dreading for months was finally here. I drove over to their house. The air was thick with unspoken questions, with a tension so palpable it felt like you could cut it with a knife. Dad was sitting in his usual armchair, the newspaper spread across his lap, staring at my name. Jake and Emma were there too, summoned for this emergency family council. So, Jake began, his lawyerly demeanor in full force, though his eyes held a flicker of something unreadable. Confusion, respect. The meditation app, your little hobby, it's successful. Very successful, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. I gave them the edited version. The hard work, the late nights, the slow build, the eventual breakthrough. I didn't mention the early struggles, the ramen noodles, the near despair. I certainly didn't mention the mortgage. Their reactions were a whirlwind. Mom looked bewildered, on the verge of tears. But all those times we asked, you just said you were freelancing. Dad was silent, his gaze fixed on me, a dawning understanding in his eyes. Emma, bless her heart, was the first to break the ice. Wait a minute, she said, her brow furrowed. Mindful Moments? That's the app I've been using? Maya, it's brilliant. It's actually helped me so much with my sleep. She looked at me, really looked at me, perhaps for the first time, with something like awe. You made that? A small, warm feeling spread through my chest. Emma, my perfect sister, was a fan. It was a start. But Jake wasn't done. He was pacing now, the newspaper article clutched in his hand. This is a lot to take in, Maya, but the timing, this app blows up, becomes a huge success. And then, out of nowhere, Mom and Dad's mortgage gets paid off by a mysterious benefactor. He stopped, his eyes locking onto mine. It's too much of a coincidence, don't you think? The air crackled. This was it, the moment of truth. I told you, I said, my voice trembling slightly despite myself. The app is doing well. I'm comfortable. I'm happy to help you guys out financially, going forward, if you need anything. It was a partial truth, an offer of future support, a deflection. Mom started to cry openly now, a mixture of relief and, I suspected, a dawning guilt. Dad just shook his head, a slow, wondering movement. But Jake was like a bloodhound. That's not what I asked, Maya, this benefactor. Was it you? I held his gaze, my heart pounding. The lie was on the tip of my tongue. But then I looked at Emma, her eyes wide with a new, fragile respect. I looked at my parents, their faces a mixture of shock and hope. Before I could answer, before I could make a decision that would change everything, Jake announced, his voice grim. I don't believe an anonymous philanthropist who just happened to rescue my parents right when my supposedly struggling sister suddenly becomes a tech millionaire. I'm hiring a private investigator. A private investigator. The walls were closing in, faster than I could have ever imagined. My carefully constructed secret was about to be ripped apart. A private investigator. Jake wasn't bluffing. The words hung in the tense air of my parents' living room. A stark pronouncement. For a week, I lived on a knife's edge, imagining shadowy figures digging into my LLC, tracing financial transactions, interviewing the lawyers who had facilitated the anonymous payment. The pressure was immense. My carefully guarded secret, the source of so much quiet triumph, was about to become a public spectacle, or at least a family one, revealed not on my terms but by a hired snoop. The thought of it, the humiliation, the inevitable, we knew you couldn't keep a secret. Or we knew there was something you weren't telling us, was almost worse than the initial mockery. I had come so far, built something real, proven them all wrong in the most spectacular way. I couldn't let the truth come out like this, tainted by suspicion and investigation. I had to tell them, all of it, before Jake's PI could. I called another family meeting. This time, I chose the venue. My new, modestly sized but sleek office space for mindful moments. A place they'd never seen, a symbol of a life they knew nothing about. They arrived looking wary, confused. Mom, Dad, Jake, Emma. They sat stiffly on the minimalist sofas in the reception area, dwarfed by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a view I still found breathtaking. "Thank you for coming," I began, my voice surprisingly calm. My team had discreetly made themselves scarce. It was just us. "There's something I need to tell you, the whole story." I started at the beginning. Not the app, but that Sunday dinner 6 months ago. I laid bare the humiliation, the sting of their laughter, the casual cruelty of their dismissal. I saw Mom flinch. Dad looked down at his hands. Jake's expression was unreadable. Emma's openly distressed. "You all thought it was a silly idea," I said, my voice even, without accusation, just stating a fact. "You thought I was a failure, incapable of seeing anything through, and maybe I needed that. Maybe I needed that anger, that hurt, to finally prove not just to you but to myself what I was capable of." Then I told them about the months of secret development, the ramen noodles, the multiple jobs, the relentless coding. I described the loneliness, the exhaustion, the tiny victories that kept me going. I saw a flicker of something, respect, in Jake's eyes. Emma was openly crying now, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. I told them about the app launch, the initial disappointment, and then Anya Sharma, the explosion of success. I showed them the graphs, the user numbers, the revenue reports. The figures were undeniable, staggering. They stared at the projections on the large monitor, their faces a mixture of shock and disbelief. And then, the hardest part. While all this was happening, I said, my gaze sweeping over their stunned faces. I found out about the mortgage, about the foreclosure. Mom gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Dad looked like he'd been punched. I didn't know what to do. I continued, the words tumbling out now. Part of me. Part of me wanted you to feel what I'd felt. To be scared. To be desperate. But then I heard Mom crying, and I knew I couldn't just stand by. The silence in the room was so thick, I could hear the giant wall clock ticking, each second an eternity. So, yes, Jake, I said, meeting my brother's intense gaze. It was me. I paid off the mortgage, anonymously, because I didn't want your gratitude if it was forced. I didn't want you to feel indebted. I wanted you to be okay. The dam broke. Mom burst into tears, deep, racking sobs of guilt and relief. Dad buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. Emma rushed to Mom's side, tears streaming down her own face. Jake just stood there, staring at me, his face pale. Then, slowly, he walked over to me. I braced myself for, I don't know what, anger, accusation. Instead, he did something he hadn't done since we were children. He hugged me, a real, heartfelt hug. Maya, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I am so, so sorry. We were idiots, arrogant, blind idiots. Can you ever forgive us? And then the apologies came, tumbling out, raw and genuine. From Mom, for her lack of faith, for her critical words. From Dad, for his passive disappointment, for not standing up for me. From Emma, for her pitying smiles, for not seeing my potential. It was messy, tearful, and incredibly cathartic. I gave my speech then, the one I'd been mentally rehearsing for months. I talked about my journey, not just the app's success, but my own internal transformation. From the girl who craved their approval to the woman who had found her own strength, her own validation. I talked about forgiveness, not as a gift to them, but as a release for myself. I don't need you to understand the world of tech or apps, I said, my voice gaining strength. But I need you to see me. Not the dreamer, not the failure, but Maya, the person who built this. I gestured around the office at the evidence of my hard-won success. And then, my final power move, the one that wasn't about revenge or secrecy, but about love, about building a new future for our family. And because this app has given me more than I ever dreamed possible, I said, a small smile playing on my lips. I've also set up college funds for Emma's kids and for any future grandchildren. So they'll have the opportunities, the freedom to pursue their own dreams without the kind of financial pressure that almost broke this family. More tears, more hugs. But this time they were different. Lighter. The guilt was still there, but it was overshadowed by a new, fragile sense of hope, of healing. We didn't go out for a fancy dinner to celebrate. Instead, we ordered pizzas to the office. My team, cautiously emerging from their hiding places, joined us. And for the first time, my family celebrated mindful moments, really celebrated it. Jake, the skeptical lawyer, asked surprisingly insightful questions about user acquisition. Emma, my first family fan, gushed about her favorite meditation tracks. Mom and Dad just watched me, their eyes shining with a pride I'd never seen before, a pride that felt real, earned. The family dynamics didn't magically transform overnight. Years of ingrained patterns don't just vanish, but something had fundamentally shifted. I was no longer Maya, the silly idea girl. I was Maya, the entrepreneur. Maya, the quiet force who had in her own way saved them. They saw me, finally. A few weeks later, at another Sunday dinner, this one feeling remarkably different, lighter, more open. I made another announcement. Mindful Moments is going international, I said, unable to keep the excitement from my voice. We're launching in Europe and Asia next quarter. Jake raised his glass. To Maya, he said, his voice clear and strong. And to Mindful Moments. May it bring peace to the world just like it brought peace to our family. Everyone echoed the toast. As I looked around the table at their smiling, supportive faces, I felt a sense of emotional closure I hadn't thought possible. The anger was gone. The hurt had faded. What remained was a stronger, more resilient love. A family, not perfect, but finally united, built on a foundation of truth, forgiveness, and a newfound, profound respect. My app hadn't just paid off a mortgage, it had bought us a second chance. And that, I realized, was the greatest success of all.